This audio is brought to you by Muslim Central. Please consider donating to help cover our running costs and future projects by visiting www.muslimcentral.com/donate.
Topic 3. Adjustment in a relationship.
You and your spouse certainly deserve to be happy and successful. You have the power to change. You both deserve to be loved. No one can diminish either one of you. You both can make decisions, and you both should be affirmed. Now, both husband and wife, I want you to say the following after me. I deserve to be happy. I have the power to change myself. I can forgive and understand others and their motives. I can make my own choices and decisions. I am free to choose and to give priority to my beliefs. I can choose happiness whenever I wish, no matter what my circumstances. I am flexible and open to change. I act with confidence, having a general plan, and accept that plans are open to alteration. It is enough to have done my very best. I deserve to be loved. Idris, our next segment is on adjustment in the relationship. Now, what's adjustment got to do with this whole topic of relationships and marriage?
It has everything to do with it, because marital life is a life that no newlyweds have been exposed to. It's a life that makes tremendous demands on each of the spouses. And what happens, this is my own experience, that if you look at marital life, the people that make the most adjustment are our beloved sisters. And that adjustment is often painful and silent. Often because of modesty, because sometimes low self-esteem, they do not share their concerns with their husbands, especially in the first 3 years of marital life, in which one makes a great deal of adjustment. I recall in one of my workshops where we had a number of couples, I asked them to hold each other's hands. And I said to them, I want the wife to speak first, and the husband must not interrupt her. She must share with the husband all the adjustment she has made in a married life. You will not believe it. The experience was cathartic. I found many of them crying, and the husbands were surprised that their spouses, someone with whom they share the intimacy, someone with whom they're supposed to know, and unbeknown to them, the wife suffered silently. Therefore, it is important that we need to recognize the adjustment is supposed to be on both sides, and that we need to help each other to ensure the adjustment is smooth. And the critical part of adjustment is simply this, Shamima. Husband and wives, they could be neighbors. They're exposed to different kinds of attitudes at home, different kinds of sleeping habits, different kinds of social interaction, different kinds of dress. The whole culture could be different. Now suddenly you have come out of that culture, that environment. Now you're sharing another environment with another person. So this can often either be a situation that can create conflict if it is not managed effectively.
One of the major contributory factors to divorce is the inability of the spouses to adjust to marriage. To what extent is this statement true?
It is very true. The word adjustment means realigning. It means rethinking. It means about renegotiating. Because your relationship with your wife is a primary relationship. You have to renegotiate your relationship with your family and friends. Although your family and friends are important, they no more are part of the primary relationship in a sense. Your friends perhaps now become tertiary in that way. So this kind of adjustment, because now you have huge responsibilities, tremendous responsibilities that can be all-consuming and requires the time and the energy. Yes, sometimes we need a kind of transition, and we're not saying to sever ties with people. And inshallah, when you talk about especially our relationship with our own mothers, that's such a critical aspect. The love for our mothers is different from the love that we have for our spouses. So adjustment is an integral part of marriage. There are many people who tell you, well, I'm married for 50 years. My husband has made no adjustment whatsoever. And that is painful. It is frightening. Now, you can only make an adjustment if you are psychologically prepared for that reality. If there has been conversation in your home and discussion about what it takes to make a home to be happy. What does it take? What do you need to do differently? For example, a father might tell his son, oh, my son, you cannot behave like this when you are married. because that can cause a problem. Now, suddenly you'll find the last straw is perhaps the towel on the bathroom floor. And then you find, the reaction of the woman. But that is symptomatic of other problems. Therefore, we as parents, we as educators need to ensure that in our school curriculum, having workshops on marriage should be an integral part of that curriculum, because it will help young people to understand who they are and their sense of responsibility. And many fathers and mothers, sadly, through lack of understanding, indifference, they do not have those kinds of conversations to help their children to understand what they are getting themselves into.
Adjustments in the home need to be made in the following areas: dress, clothing, sleeping habits, the daily routine, spirituality, eating habits, and social activities. Now, I want you to just take perhaps one of them to discuss, because the first one I can think of immediately after the marriage is the new home that you're going to be living in.
Okay, Shamima, I want to ask you this question. What adjustment did you have to make? What were some of the challenges that you found?
The first thing I can think of is that separation from my parents. I remember actually getting sick after I got married, because I suddenly realized that they're not there anymore and I have to be this adult. I have to grow up. And it suddenly hits you this reality that the stranger that I'm now living with is my life partner. And I think it's a cathartic feeling, because you now have to question yourself on what is the way forward? What am I going to do about it? Am I going to cry to go to my mom's house? Or am I going to discuss it with my spouse, as we're talking about the communication? And what I found was that the communication was so important. I'm feeling sad because I'm suddenly without my parents. I'm living in this new home. And really speaking, when you get married, you're suddenly living with a stranger whom you have to discover.
Therefore, I'm glad you're mentioning this. Therefore, sometimes many parents create a world of fantasy where, for example, this is for the boys and the girls, our daughters and our sons. Many of them are not exposed to household chores, the domestic reality. And what happens then? Suddenly they're in a home, and when they got to do these things where the man has to also help with the household chores, he may not have done it when he was staying with his mom and dad. And that creates also a huge problem where the wife is now almost like a slave, where the man is like a king. King, man, I'm the king, man. You serve me. The reason we are focusing on adjustment is because if couples do not know how to deal with each other in this very critical period, a period that will determine the happiness, the stability of the marriage, or it will determine really the pain, the eternal pain. I'll give you one simple example. A person A might be married to someone who has not been exposed to humanity at large. Socially incompetent, in a sense, doesn't have the skills. Whilst you are the more gregarious person, interacting in the community, you have a public profile, and you grew up in a home where you had visitors every day. And for you, you cannot imagine life without people or visitors. On the other hand, if you grew up in a home where there are not many people, if your family, for example, did not interact with the neighbors, and if you, on the other extreme, did not even go for wedding functions, you'll feel socially inadequate. Now, can you imagine this young girl who's anticipating joy and a life of bed of roses, if you will, is in this home, and every day there are people coming in and out, in and out. And then the man will begin to wonder, but my gosh, why is my wife not interacting? Why is she not friendly? Why is she getting uptight? So this is important. The period in which the man, in this instance, need what we call perspective transformation. He needs to see it through the eyeballs of his wife and help her through this period, which is a very painful period, because what she's exposed to is something she has never, ever been exposed to before. And the final thought on this matter that requires far more discussion is no more the I, it's now the we. It's no more about my life, it's about our life. It's no more about my hobbies, my friends, and so on and so forth. It now means our hobbies, our friends, our life together.
Becoming a couple is one of the most complex and difficult transitions of the family. The honeymoon period is now over. What comes next?
Now the couple, they have to renegotiate a great many personal issues which were previously defined for them, for themselves, or defined by their parents. For example, when to eat, when to sleep, how to celebrate holidays, so on and so forth. At the time of honeymoon, we find that couples come back smiling, they're excited, but life is not all about honeymoon. You require more than love to sustain a relationship. For example, in the first 3 years of marriage, there are some general patterns of adjustment. General. Maybe with some couples, there may be specific differences. For the first 6 months of marriage, which is really considered by many people a honeymoon phase, is really characterized by few serious problems, but there is a general sense of satisfaction. At about 6 to 12 months, optimism, really what happens to it, suddenly it fades into realism, because now suddenly where the spouse is more confident, there's a difference of opinion, and then suddenly the issues of financial obligations come about, and then there are bad habits, perhaps you suddenly see in your partner, or there is a kind of boredom that sets in. Now, from about 12 to 36 months of marriage, there may be a short period of disillusionment, where now, your so-called knight in shining armor seems to have lost his shine, or your maiden fair has been less than fair, for example. There are challenges for time or money, childbearing, even sexual adjustment. Now it requires new coping strategies. And then with children coming up, this could also further make adjustment a little more difficult. But during 18 to 36 months, really, Shamima, the couples begin to sort of get accustomed to live together, and couples who cannot accept or even improve the quality of life together tend to break up. But those couples who remain committed to building a strong marriage begin to develop what I call a realistic view of what it is to be successful. Now, the point that I made earlier on about those couples that break up, this is a point, you see, that marriage needn't break up. They need to have the resolve and understand this is a period of adjustment where we can help and nurture each other.
So certainly, strong marriages are the result of efforts by both spouses to try and make this marriage work. In a study where information was gathered from spouses who had been married for at least 45 years, revealed 6 keys to their very successful long-term marriages, and I want to quickly read them to you. Consider your mate as your best friend. Like your mate as a person. See your marriage as a long-term commitment. See marriage as a sacred institution. Agree on goals, and most importantly, and so simple, laugh together frequently. Now, relationships that survive and continue to deepen are generally happy, always adjusting, and always under construction. I like that word, under construction. Now, Idris, I'm sure there's some strategies to help those of us to improve the harmony in the home, improve harmony in the relationship. What strategies can you give us for building a strong marriage, inshallah?
I think the bottom line is there must be a commitment, because once there is commitment, this commitment really brings vitality to the marriage relationship. And for example, if either of the spouses entertains the idea of escaping the marriage through divorce, then the marriage is already in jeopardy. And commitment really provides a kind of foundation. And it is through this commitment where the couples together can work through obstacles and the many challenges they would be confronted with. The other important aspect is trust. And trust is so critical to undergird any marital relationship. And through the trust, it must include also mutual respect. When couples show disrespect to each other, both in private and in public, then that marriage is very fragile, and it requires a renewed commitment, a renewed trust to ensure that the marriage is transformed from a fragile one to one that is stable. The other aspect that has become a recurring theme, and I'm so glad, Shamima, you make a reference to this, is communication. Now, communication is so critical in all levels, because once you communicate, your spouse would know exactly what you feel, will understand your values and your attitudes. Because when a person speaks, when he does speak from his heart or she speaks from her heart, it is a window to their soul. And the issue of conflict, I know in some homes they have few conflicts, but they do have conflicts. But yet it does not impact negatively on the marriage. But the real test is how they manage those conflicts. In the end, it's not about I won, you lost, because every conflict must end off with such discussion in the end that both people are winners. If one is a winner, then that marriage also would suffer. And, we are told as Muslims that we must seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. We must also develop tremendous skills in terms of communication, self-understanding, even decision-making, which is so critical. I remember someone defined adulthood as decision-making. And the ability to manage conflict, the ability to see another perspective. And what it really tells you, that we cannot remain static. We need to grow. We need to do self-study. We need to always go towards excellence. Caring is one thing. For example, now, when you tell your spouse that you love her, that implies that you are caring for his or her needs. And remember, responding to your own needs is just as important as responding to the needs of your spouse. The other important issue is affection. Once you begin to demonstrate the affection for your spouse, demonstrating it, showing it, both in private and in public. Of course, we need to curb our excesses in public, but naturally, it is so important to do that because it is inspiring, it is reassuring, it is affirming, it is acknowledging. The other aspect is expectations. Often many people have a jaundice or a purely romantic view about life. In the movies, you find the man sees her, they fall in love, they get married. There is no problem of parking. They get up excited every morning. They see each other, flowers are being, exchanged, and goes on and on that way. I'm not suggesting that we should not introduce aspects of it in our marriage, but one has to be very realistic and have certain realistic expectations in terms of what life is all about. Is when people have the wrong expectations and when they are unrealistic, then you find many of them get very, very frustrated. You say, well, I married him. This is what I thought my life is going to be all about. Here is an example often of a person with low self-esteem who believes her happiness is dependent largely on what her husband does or does not do. The last point in this regard is a question of priority. We need, very importantly, to make marriage our priority. It is one of the most critical relationships. We need to put time, we need to put effort, and the whole idea of willing to work together and to say, you know what, let us spend time. And one of my recurring themes is to celebrate our relationships with members of our family and especially our spouse. And we do it. And if we can take out a critical part of our time and say, my darling, this is for you because I love you and I'll do anything for you. And I hope that you understand. I've said this to you so many times.
So there we go. The strategies for building a strong marriage are as follows. Show commitment, trust in your spouse, communicate with your partner, manage conflict in a way that is mutually satisfying, develop skills, be caring toward your partner, show affection to your spouse, set realistic expectations, and prioritize time for the marriage, inshallah. And I think that is going to lead to a happy, healthy marriage in which commitment of both spouses is definitely necessary. Change and growth are definitely part of a healthy marriage. Always search for additional ways to renew and enrich your relationship. Your marriage depends on it.
The most important point, and I'm repeating it for a purpose, that we mustn't forget why we are here on this earth. If your marital life helps you to understand your purpose, then your spouse is good for you. If your spouse helps you to forget your purpose, then that marriage really requires a lot of construction.
Topic 4. Shura and Communication.
The next topic that we're going to tackle is entitled Shura and Communication. I want to see what you know about your communication skills. Do you look at your spouse when listening to him or her? Are you trying to understand how your spouse feels instead of thinking how you feel about what he or she is telling you? Do you listen patiently to all that your spouse has to say before you start talking? Are you truly interested in what your spouse tells you? Do you expect your spouse to stop what he or she is doing and listen when you need to tell him or her something? Do you stop what you are doing when your spouse has something important to say? Do you listen in a way that encourages your spouse to express his or her real feelings? And finally, do you listen with affection to your spouse? Now, Idris, I said that first because it's really important for a spouse to understand what this art of communication is all about. And listening is also part of the communication. And I think generally when we talk of communication, we seem to think it's about the talking. And I know you always say the listening is more important. Now, if I took this test, as it were, and I realized in certain aspects that, hey, I am doing the wrong thing. I'm more interested in my response when my partner's sharing something with me. What are some of the changes that I could effect?
One of the most ennobling things in life is when you speak to anyone, when that person listens with his heart. That person is telling you, I love you, I care for you, you are important. He shuts his mind. He doesn't think about anything else. And he tells himself, I'm listening to you because I care for you and I love you. What it does is really, and listening is so critical because what it really does is the point that I always make, revealing is healing. It inspires confidence in the other. And he says, you know, when I talk to my husband, he stops everything and he listens and he listens. We are so preoccupied in trying to think of some answer. And in trying to do that, we miss some important cues. And you know, our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was such a wonderful listener. And I think it's appropriate, perhaps I need to bring to bear the prophetic model. Our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam listened. He never interrupted any person when the person spoke. When he turned his body to the person, what message was he giving? That you are important. And this is such a beautiful, beautiful sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the busiest of prophets, but he was able to give time to everyone. If we can do it, because there is a big irony in the sense that many of us tend to do it with people outside our homes. So we need to listen with empathy, trying to understand your partner. In that way, it will make a huge difference. Because men generally are trying to give solutions to problems, but yet the wife purely wants someone to listen. Of course, I would also, as a word of caution, our timing must also be appropriate, right? For example, when a man just comes from a day's work, he had a very stressful life, very difficult life, very challenging life, and the wife is eager to share something with him, allow the period of calmness. Let him also unwind. Let her unwind also. And after the period of calmness, when they've eaten something together, then they could talk about it. They talk about the issues they had the whole day, the frustrations, the exasperations, those happy moments. Because many women also complain they only learn about their husband in terms of what he's doing in the community through other people. And because we have taken our life partners for granted and we need to elevate them.
Now here I want to talk about the wife who is a stay-at-home mom. Usually what I find is that the wives feel unimportant and feel that talking about what happened during my day is not going to be interesting to my husband because he's had a wonderful day out in the world, led a social life, met other people, and all I did was interact with the maid, interact with the gardener, and interact with one teacher at school when I went to pick up my children. How can we empower this kind of woman?
There are many things, but I want to start off by saying, do we need any more elevation than how Allah has elevated the female, the mother? How critical she is in terms of who she is. But an important thing is this, and I would also recommend very strongly that if circumstances dictate that the woman is at home, then she can also enrich her life through many things. She can enrich her life through reading, through interacting with the neighbors, and depending on the relationship with the husband and wife, she can also make a significant contribution to society. Now, in the end, we tend to diminish ourselves, and this is a point. When a woman has a low self-esteem, then there is a huge gap between her and the husband. You find the relationship is not on equal terms. I use the word advisedly. She finds it difficult to raise issues or to question because there is a kind of obligation in terms because the husband, through Allah's mercy, brings food to the table because she does not have the kind of economic independence. Now, on the other extreme, there are many people who have economic independence, but they have forgotten what the purpose is. There is a sense of self-aggrandizement to a point of being aloof. And how often I have found when I'm dealing with marital conflict, conflict where a man seems very diminished. And because, Rosie, the risk comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are times when a man who has been, as it were, a person bringing food to the table through Allah's mercy, he might have been affluent, but because of some decision or because of economic challenges, such a man now finds himself out of work. He finds that he cannot bring that food to the table as he used to do previously. Now the woman suddenly speaks to him anyhow. She's abrasive and rude, and I find this really, and it's very sad, because we tend to forget. Therefore, the point our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam has made, that if you think of Allah in the time of prosperity, He'll think of you in the time of adversity. And this again is aligned to one's purpose. And there is nowhere that I know that people have indicated quite categorically that the woman is basically a slave. She does nothing. She's not part of the ummati of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she's not allowed to make any significant contribution in terms of what she does, her involvement with the community and uplifting humanity at large.
Now I want to go back to the scenario you just mentioned, where there's this family that is going through some sort of financial difficulty. Husband's now less empowered financially, and okay, you're saying communication needs to take place. What will this couple be talking about?
You see, in any circumstances, we should ask ourselves, what should couples be talking about in the first place? I think part of communication is reaffirming each other. It's about also understanding the other. It builds up a solid relationship. How often we find that some men would say, Alhamdulillah, when I went through that difficult time, my only supporter, of course Allah is my supporter, the only supporter I had was my wife, when everyone else did not believe in me, who shunned me because now suddenly I wasn't the blue-eyed boy, a man driving a fancy car. So I was really discarded by community and by society. But my wife stuck with me. She endured with me. She believed in me. She did not nag me. And that's a very important aspect. So part of communication is that we need to communicate our feelings, our attitudes, to talk about issues, to talk about Allah and His beloved Rasul. We need to talk about in terms of what we intend to do, to strategize, to talk about the future, to talk about the challenges, a whole range of things. And somehow the other, prior to marriage, people appear to be talking to each other telephonically or whatever, but suddenly after marriage, suddenly the same husband was such an exuberant person. He looked so depressed and sometimes even constipated. So what needs to be borne in mind is that, yes, I acknowledge there are many challenges today, but what we talk about depends largely on our needs. But more importantly, the assumption is that when we are together, we are talking. And if you're not talking, even the silence is a time for you to reflect. Just being with your partner is enough without anyone nagging. Just being there itself is beautiful. There is solitude in that. There is the recognition, the otherness, recognition that I'm here with you. This is the physical bonding. It also reflects the spiritual and emotional bonding.
Mutual consultation, or shura, is definitely an important component in a healthy relationship. Why is this so?
You see, the whole element of shura, we are told by our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam words to this effect. Whenever shura takes place, and where, for example, like in the home where the man is the Amir of the house, if he were to make a decision, and if that decision ends up to be a wrong decision, he still gets one blessing. They get a blessing. But if the decision was the right one, then there are two blessings. But the whole idea is about consultation. The Quran speaks about that we need to consult. Consultations are so important. What it does basically is saying to share things. And one of the beautiful things about verbalizing things, you often hear something for the first time. The other person could be a sounding box. The other person perhaps could give you another perspective. And with more information that you have, you are able, for example, to make a more appropriate or correct decision. But what it also does is saying to your life partner, to your wife, I value your comment. I want you to participate.
Can this not elevate the person's self-esteem?
Of course. It's a very subtle point there. I see, Shamima, you've been wide awake, right? But on the other extreme, if you find that there is no consultation, where the man is almost dictatorial, autocratic, then it would impact negatively on her. It will erode her self-esteem. But I'm not suggesting that for every little thing there must be shura. Now, give a simple example. You are walking down this road. You meet one of your best friends from another part of the world, and it's supper time. And you tell him, brother, join me for supper. And on the way now with cell phones, at least our beloved wives, the sisters at home have an opportunity to listen. Assalamu alaikum. Darling, I have, my friend is here. We're coming home for supper, right? That could create also a conflict. Now that's a point to be made, the point that I made earlier on, that inviting someone home is such a beautiful thing. There is barakah, the person makes dua for you, and Allah is a provider of food. Now, in case you do go home, you have your meals there, and afterwards when you're alone, your wife might tell you that, how could you just tell me like that? You always do this to me, right? Now, we need to discuss these issues. Therefore, in the early stages of your marriage, this must be discussed in terms of your likes, your dislikes, your pet aversions.
Why do you think the concept of shura will solve marital problems?
It will solve marital problems because there is a recognition of the other. You're able to understand your spouse, will understand exactly where she comes from, where you come from. It will create bonding. It will strengthen the relationship. It will create mutual respect.
Topic 5. The power of two.
You certainly are committed to the sacred institution of marriage, and clearly you want to do whatever is right. We are glad that all of you are seeing the relationship not only from your perspective, but also and most importantly from the perspective of your spouse. We are living in a world where we are primarily concerned with our own rights. This concern somehow dwarfs into insignificance one's duties. It is very important for you to bear in mind the fact that life becomes harmonious when each one of us fulfills our duties. In fulfilling our duties, we are in essence upholding the rights of others. Therefore, we are going to be talking in this segment about the power of two, celebrating the relationship between husband and wife. Why the power of two, Idris?
I recall a few months ago, I met a friend of mine, and he was telling me, he said, Idris, I used to always wonder that when my mother passed away, I was in a lot of pain. But I used to wonder, whenever my dad used to lift up his hands and pray, he always teared. He was so emotional. I never understood, Only now that my wife passed away, now I understand fully his tears. Because the power of two is something we cannot overemphasize. People are able to go through life with the many trials and tribulations when they know full well they have emotional, spiritual and psychological support from the partner. When two people are involved in something, there is barakah, there is blessing, Allah's rahmah descends. It's about united in one's purpose, have a commonality of vision. Therefore, I remember when I came across the title once, The Power of Two. Wow, I said, it is magic. And if we understand that power, sadly, many of us only understand the power after through divorce or other problems. And one quotation I often use, that love knows not its own depth except at the hour of parting. It mustn't be that you appreciate the person that you love only after that person is gone.
So definitely two individuals who choose to form a marital union, whatever decision they make has enormous power, and I think for better or for worse, over the quality of their lives. Their marriage can bring them infinite blessings or misfortune, disappointment and strife. And I think this is where we are, inshallah, trying to help couples develop a more harmonious relationship, inshallah.
An added point, how often you hear people say, and I remember a dear friend of mine who met up with a very serious accident. At that time, he did not know that his wife was indomitable. She was resilient. She had tremendous capacity. At that time, they were refurbishing the home. And whilst she was in hospital, he was thinking, now how is this going to be done? But lo and behold, his wife, his beloved wife, fulfilled all those obligations with flair and confidence. And then he realized, he was diminishing her. He was undermining her. And it's time that we open our hearts to each other.
Now, usually at the beginning of a marriage, the couple is very, very happy. They are in love. Now, will this love alone be enough to keep one living together with one spouse happily and forever after?
No, love is important, but it is not the most important part or most important aspect in a relationship. It needs to be repeated that what we require is knowledge, understanding, trust, respect, commonality of vision, consideration, a whole range of things. Because love itself is not going to help. Oh, I love you. I'm tired of your love. because your love does nothing but gives me pain. And initially what happens is this, when there is this kind of chemistry and they say love is blind, as they say puppy love is the beginning of a dog's life, that love is blind and marriage is an eye-opener. They say all of these things because marriage itself has concomitant responsibilities. Love is beautiful. It is important. If that underpins your relationship, alhamdulillah, but you require other things. For example, if you have a beautiful home with a poor foundation, that beauty itself will not last too long. And there'll be a sense of insecurity with members of that household knowing full well that the foundation is weak.
Now, I just want to give you an analogy here. Just like a garden blossoms when the weather is sunny, marriages flower under emotional sunshine. Now, words that come to mind are appreciation, affection, caring, giving. These seem to be the sunshine for the partners. A marriage definitely will feel more full as this warmth increases. What can a couple do to increase this warmth?
I like the use of sunshine. Every person has an image of his spouse. And I pray the image they have is of warmth, sunshine, spring, life, regeneration, excitement, full of promises. The other image could be darkness, autumn landscape, wintry and cold. And I pray that each one of us brings sunshine to each other. Today, I'm smiling and giggling a bit. And today someone told me, Idris, oh man, I'm so happy when I see you. I says, well, you must come home. You must tell my wife that you get happy when you see me, At least someone is happy. And this is a point that we do not say enough to our spouses. We take it for granted. We assume that tomorrow he or she will be there. We assume that.
Well, here I'm going to give you some ways of expressing the sunshine. Initiate a hug or a gentle touch. Agree with something that your spouse said. Pitch in and help with something you don't usually do in the household. Gladly do your part of the household functioning. Express admiration. For example, I like the color that you are wearing. Express thanks for something your spouse has done. And this is one we always forget to do. Smile. Be playful. Declare your love. Talking together, say what you appreciate about your spouse. Discuss a personal dilemma. Share things about your day and discuss issues that are on your mind. Set aside time to spend time together. Do an activity together that you both enjoy. Together, help someone or do a volunteer project. Inquire about something of importance to your spouse. Give a gift. Something you make or find or buy doesn't even have to be expensive. Laugh together. And finally, cherish your spouse. These are ways, inshallah, that you can bring the sunshine into your marriage.
You see, what underpins everything, it's about doing. It's about taking action steps to bring people closer together.
I love this beautiful metaphor of sunshine that we spoke about. It gives me the idea of hope. We're talking about a future. We're not talking about just doom and gloom. And I think what's coming out of this is to say that, yes, there is a way forward. Yes, if you do these things and if you try out these pieces of advice given in this CD, inshallah, there is going to be that sunshine in your home, inshallah. Now, from your experience with people and in dealing with relationships, are there any distinct patterns that you have found in relationships?
Yes, I found several patterns, but I look at some general patterns that perhaps reflect the time that we are living in and perhaps also what time's gone by. And inshallah, I'll show you why the prophetic model is indeed the model all of us need to embrace. The first is in a patriarchal society where it's a male chauvinist, and to illustrate it in a diagram in a circle where the man is in the northern hemisphere and the woman in the southern hemisphere. The whole idea that I'm in charge, I'm in control of this kingdom, this is my domain, and you are my vassal, you are my subject, and you are completely subservient to me. Whilst at a particular time that worked in the sense where the woman acceded or they began to acquiesce, as it were, to that lifestyle, they began to give in, it also created a reaction. The reaction has been, the woman says, no, you're not in the northern hemisphere, I am in the Northern Hemisphere. This resulted really in the feminist movement. It was very, very strong. It also created lots of acrimony and hostility, that we are in charge. We are no more going to be subservient. We are going to be vocal. And what actually happened there, instead of that being a solution, whilst it gave women independence, it really exacerbated the problem. Now, the relationship between husband and wife has become adversarial. And you found that many of them really did not embrace the sacred institution of marriage. But if you look at the prophetic model with the circle, but this time the diameter is not horizontal, but it is vertical. On the left hemisphere, for example, is the man, and the right hemisphere is a woman, but with a particular axis. The axis reflects that there are times when the man encroaches almost into the domain of the woman to assist her and support her in whatever she is doing. For example, it could be household chores, and especially the time when the mother is under tremendous pressure, where the husband helps, supports, engages with her to fulfill that responsibility. And similarly, in the axis at the bottom, the woman also encroaches into the male domain, as it were, to assist and to support.
Can I just explain the diagram here a little bit so that we all have the proper image? And you tell me if I'm right or wrong. Here you're saying the diameter needs to go from top to bottom. That's what we're talking about, vertical, with the husband on the one side and the wife on the other. But the axis that you are referring to is drawn at a diagonal. So it's neither vertical nor horizontal. So if you're drawing a circle, draw the diameter down the center, giving you your left and right hemisphere. One is the husband's, one is the wife's. And then going through the middle of the diameter, if you can have a deviant axis. By this I mean your axis needs to be diagonal. The axis needs to start on the wife section and end off in the husband section, because now what you're going to continue with, Idris, is going to be a little bit more relevant because I have a diagram in front of me.
Thank you so much. And it's quite clear that Shamima is a maths teacher. I sometimes go off at a tangent, so she reminds me. So the whole idea behind that illustration is to show you that the home is not the sole preserve of the woman, and especially the kitchen. That a man, and as our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as you and I know, is to help his wives with household chores. And he only left when he heard the call of azan. And similarly, the women also helped their husbands in things that they were doing, because there are very few things in this world are only the sole preserve of either the woman or that man. What it really does, it does not create hostility, it creates harmony, it creates compassion, it creates caring and support. It tells her, I love you, therefore I help you with your burden. And you are telling your husband, I love you. No amount of words can really replace those kinds of action that reflect a great deal of sympathy and sensitivity. So I would encourage men who feel that really they should not enter the kitchen except to reprimand the wife if the food is taking too long, is why don't you cook a meal sometimes? Why don't you do that? And that will tell your spouse, I love you and I'm here to help you. I love you.
And from my experience with women, Idris, women are often saying they want a little help in the kitchen. They're not saying spend all your time in the kitchen with me, but the women are saying that just to show that you care, say to the wife, you know what, you go and put your feet up, or you go and sit with the children and I'll prepare dinner today. And it doesn't have to be a 3-course meal. It can be something basic like sandwiches. But the fact that the woman is now not stressed, having to worry about going into the kitchen and preparing, because you must remember, no matter what you're preparing, even if it's something light, it's effort and it's timing. And likewise, men are saying that they want women to be understanding that it's been a hard day of work, and how they want the woman to handle that kind of situation where, as you said previously, you don't allow your husband to walk in and start bombarding him. You know, the children did this, you know, the maid did this, you know, the bathroom tap is not working, that kind of thing.
Yes, just to conclude this, Shamima, you alluded to this. Sometimes there is this kind of notion, well, you know, I work hard, I had a tough day, but my wife, she's having a good time. She's relaxing at home. And this is a wrong notion, because the responsibility of a mother is so demanding. Men do not have the emotional strength, neither the patience or the resilience to endure what the woman goes through. What is required really? A reciprocal understanding of each other and what they do. And in that way, I have no doubt it will create harmony.
Topic 6. Dealing with in-laws and the role of grandparents.
The objectives of this segment are as follows. For you to analyze your relationship with your in-laws. For you and your spouse to confront each other about your attitudes toward your in-laws. And finally, for you to appreciate the need for a harmonious relationship with the in-laws. A really important topic, and let's see what angle we're going to be taking, inshallah. It's quite gratifying to note that you are now connecting with your spouse after the topics that we have done, alhamdulillah. Now, one of the reasons why many people divorce is because of their inability to deal with in-laws. We need to acknowledge that whilst this may be a sensitive issue, what is needed is wisdom, compassion, and consideration. Happiness is not a selfish emotion. It embraces not only us, but also our parents. It has been found that families who enjoy true happiness are ones that get emotional and spiritual support from their extended families. In fact, couples can unleash their true potential knowing full well they have abiding support from their parents. In this segment, what is needed is for you to confront your true self in terms of your relationship with your in-laws. To what extent do you think you are unreasonable or fair in your assessment of them, and more importantly, in your relationship with them? It is critical for you not to forget the big picture. Your happiness in the marital relationship would be affected by the happiness or otherwise of your spouse. The need for compromise and decisiveness is fundamental. Now, this probably started you thinking of your in-laws, or you perhaps thinking of your spouse's relationship with your parent. Whichever way it is, let's see what is your relationship with your in-laws. And here we're going to be doing a very quick analysis, because you're going to then determine how much of this applies to you. What do you believe about in-laws? Now, there are 5 options for each, with number 1 being strongly agree and number 5 strongly disagree. I'll give you the others in between. Number 1 is strongly agree. Number 2, mildly agree. Number 3, not sure. Number 4, mildly disagree. And number 5, strongly disagree. So we're going from number 1, agree, to number 5, disagree. And this is an analysis that both husband and wife can do in their relationship to their in-laws. Question 1. In-laws can be best described as outlaws. Here you're going to rate number 1 as you strongly agree, number 5 strongly disagree, with mildly agree, disagree, and not sure in between. If you've forgotten, you can actually go back to the previous track to get this. In-laws should not be consulted when major decisions are made. Number 3, in-law visits should be few and far between. Number 4, daughters-in-law should not confront their in-laws. Number 5, sons-in-law should not confront their in-laws. Number 6, all disputes of daughters-in-law should be handled by the husband. Remember, you're answering number 1, strongly agree, number 2, mildly agree, number 3, not sure, number 4, mildly disagree, and number 5, strongly disagree. Number 7, neither the husband nor the wife should show any disrespect through word or action to the in-laws. Number 8, mothers-in-law should stay far away from the kitchen. Number 9, when in-laws want to visit, they should inform timeously. Number 10, in-laws should never accompany the husband and wife on any holidays. Number 11, I believe that I will be a wonderful mother-in-law. Number 12, I believe that I will be a wonderful father-in-law. Number 13, in-laws should not interfere with the discipline of the grandchildren. And number 14, the final one, children should be allowed to spend holidays with the grandparents. So here you've answered number 1, moving on to the top of the range, number 5, with number 1 being strongly agree and number 5 being strongly disagree. Have you been able to analyze your relationship with your in-laws? Now, Idris, such a big analysis, so much in introduction about in-laws. What is the problem with regard to in-laws?
Shamima, there are many issues, many problems, but I use the word problems advisedly. I see them as challenges. To me, it is very sad that the inability, as you indicated in your introduction, the inability of people to deal with the in-laws has contributed largely to tensions, even to divorces. Because sadly, there are not many people who know how to deal with others. And often you find the root cause is not so much the personality or the character of the mother-in-law. It often is a result of the insecurity of the daughter-in-law. And I believe that in life is never meant to be easy, but it is your challenge how you deal with that, how you manage the relationship, how you decide, for example, how to deal with conflicts. Those series of questions that you asked are very critical questions, because if the husband and wife are not on the same page or not have a similar understanding of those issues, then any one of these issues could be a cause of conflict, of acrimony, and even bitterness. And what we need to understand in the end, that if we want to have a harmonious relationship, and I want to share this, and the point that you made so beautifully, that happiness is not a selfish emotion, it embraces others. That many people have this notion that, well, my wife and I'm getting married to her, I'm not getting married to my in-laws, and I'm happy with her. But sadly, life is not all about that. She has a relationship with her parents. She's connected to them because of who she is. So the way to happiness is really embracing the whole. In that way, you become closer to your spouse.
One thing we need to remember is that the in-laws are our children's grandparents. And I think if you work from that premise, you're going to have more respect for them, and you'll accept their importance in being part of the family.
That is important, because every parent does things differently. And what is important, that the children themselves are in essence a product of the environment. And we need to understand that, because the way you've been brought up, whilst to you might appeal to you because it is about you, you become very critical. But what we need to understand in life, there are many ways of doing things. That whilst parents may differ in some ways, as long as the product in the end is a product that is respectful, embodies dignity, and knows how to deal with others, then it's fine. So we need to respect that, because many people do not want to change, and as a result they become very negative, and we got to understand that they are his parents and you got to respect them.
It is from your experience in dealing with people and handling people's relationships and their problems, what are the kind of issues that parents-in-law are saying about their daughters-in-law or sons-in-law, and the other way around? What are daughters-in-law and sons-in-law saying? Look, I don't like this that my mother-in-law does, or I don't like this that my father-in-law does. Maybe we can then have an idea that this is what I'm doing wrong.
There are many things, right? And one of the things is this. They feel that sometimes mother-in-laws can be an intrusion. They come in at inappropriate times. They might, for example, early in the morning phone their son up. Or, for example, in their conversation with their son, they show little or no regard. And in fact, when they want to invite their son and daughter-in-law home, they feel they need to only communicate it with the son. And as a result, the daughter-in-law feels marginalized. And what has also happened is this, there is almost like a sense of insecurity on the part of mother-in-law sometimes, and even daughters-in-law, because the mother feels she has lost her son. And she tries everything, she clings tenaciously to him, while she had all the opportunity of bringing him up and nurturing him. And the daughter-in-law on the other side of the coin also feels insecure, and she feels that she and the mother-in-law are competing for the son's attention. But what she needs to understand, that she is the mother, and a mother has many rights over the son. And that is very, very important. Now, any relationship in which any spouse, and for example through coercion or whatever method that he might or she might use, make sure, for example, that there is little contact between the son and his parents or the daughter and her parents, then that relationship is bound to suffer.
What about a problem in the home with in-laws, sometimes just being as a result of a misunderstanding? And here again, I'm moving to, I think, a bit of a mantra that I'm using, and I'm talking here about communication. Oftentimes you hear the following words, my mother-in-law said, or I overheard my mother-in-law saying this, that, or the other, and likewise the mother-in-law is saying a similar thing. And on numerous occasions, upon investigation, it was found that it was just a big misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding plays a significant role. And what needs to be done is, before you have a knee-jerk reaction to anything, you need to understand, for example, what has happened, what was communicated. And instead of responding with anger and acrimony, it's better to identify, rather better to confirm whether what was said was what you have heard. And misunderstanding really creates problems. And often it's not so much the reality, but the perception of the situation that really is problematic.
It's generally accepted that when you get married, you not only marry your spouse, but you're also marrying into the family or into a system. In-laws come in different types. Some are supportive and respect the marital boundaries. Others act like it is your duty to serve their needs. In order to deal with in-laws, you have to be willing to adopt a different mindset and attitude change. Then you can enjoy smooth sailing. Now, Idris, what I want from you here is some guidance as to what a son or daughter-in-law or prospective son and daughter-in-law might do to minimize the possibilities of having in-law difficulties. I like this term, in-law difficulties. Now, I know you're going to do 10 tips with me, and I want to just read each one and then you're going to elaborate on it. I think that way we'll definitely get the 10 tips, and then you're going to perhaps give us examples or elaborate on them. Number 1, first and foremost, accept that your in-laws aren't your parents. As a result, they aren't likely to have the same ways of doing things or the same sets of rules as your parents did. Compromise on differences that are less important and negotiate those that are more essential.
Yes, compromise is fundamental in life. Compromise is fundamental in managing all relationships. But when there are issues, thorny issues that impact, it is critical that one confronts it, because often when these things are not confronted, it could really erode the happiness and it could really create lots of tensions.
Number 2, realize and accept that you can't change someone else. You can only change yourself. Build better relationships with your in-laws by recognizing your role in any conflict.
It's very important for us to look introspectively, to reflect. It is very easy, in fact, to be judgmental, but it's far more critical we look inwardly, introspectively, and see what you can change. The only person you can change is yourself. Changing your attitude, changing your behavioral pattern. In that way, you'll find that you're able to embrace them. In that way, you'll find you're able to engender a very strong relationship. But the moment you sit back and become judgmental, that'll be problematic.
And I think that usually is what happens.
Yes, it's true, Shamima.
Dealing with in-laws, tip number 3. Think of your in-laws as a potential resource to expand your support network. Get to know them by spending time with them. Listen to them and create a reciprocal relationship where they can get to know you. Try and engage in some social activities that are compatible with your in-laws.
In this way, the emphasis rather is on you trying to get to know the other instead of wanting them to get to know you. You show the initiative, and one of the ways of getting to know them is to visit them, have a conversation with them, because in the end, all parents want to feel satisfied that the daughter is married to someone that is worthy of her love, person that can be emotionally supportive of her, and perhaps together as a couple, they can do things, inshallah, that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other idea is to do some activities together, because once you are involved in activities, that is one sure way of bringing people together, because you are united in the purpose.
Number 4, create a separate relationship from your spouse with your in-laws. This is very important to nurture a family environment at home and decrease future marital conflicts.
Yes, you mustn't be recognized as the son-in-law, that is the husband of my daughter. You need to have a separate relationship with them in which you discuss other things besides marriage. When you, for example, create a sense of interest, is a kind of bonding that goes on. In that way, instead of them becoming judgmental, instead of them having a knee-jerk reaction when the daughter comes home, they say, but no, in our relationship with him, he appears to be a wonderful human being. In that way, they'll be able to be more forthright and patient, and perhaps will recognize there's a need for negotiation rather than ensuring that the marriage does not work.
Idris, I just want to, before I move on to number 5, ask you something else. Here we're giving tips on how to deal with the in-law. Now, if it is an in-law who is presently listening to us on the CD, can these tips and rules apply to an in-law with regard to their daughter-in-law or son-in-law?
Yes, of course. Of course, it applies to all of them.
All right, I just needed to make that clear. Thank you. Tip number 5. If you are experiencing conflict with your in-laws, talking to your spouse to get their opinion is a good thing. However, making your spouse the middle person to solve the conflict is not fair. This is a lifelong relationship with your in-laws. You need to learn to deal with them in a pleasant way.
That is one of the most critical points. Sometimes women have some issues with their mother-in-law. The issues may be serious or it may be even trivial. But then to insist and tell your husband, tell him, please, I want you to solve this now, right? If you don't do this, that will be a big problem. Because one of the worst things is for any man to see his mother through the eyeballs of his wife. That way it taints a relationship that is often based on innocence. Now it is begrimed, as it were, by this kind of thing. So what is important here is this: to look at the situation. If something requires discussion, inshallah, I pray that the daughter-in-laws learn how to cope with the mothers-in-law, and where they are able to talk about issues without being antagonistic but in a pleasant way. Often, as you said at the beginning, many things happen because of misunderstanding or oversight, and we don't want a situation that breeds conflict.
Number 6, host a formal event to meet the in-laws. Serve food that you know is the favorite of either of your in-laws.
In that way, they'll say, wow, they love us. They know what we like. And when you do these little things, you find that the in-laws themselves will take a quantum leap, as it were, to embrace you.
Number 7, always remember to keep things in perspective. Clashes with your mother-in-law may actually intensify as you get older. A newly married younger woman may not be very confident about her own opinions, and if she has a mother-in-law who says things ought to be done her way, it's harder to challenge her. But by the time a woman is middle-aged, she is normally a well-established adult who has her own strong opinions and feels more confident. As a result, she's more likely to confront her mother-in-law head-on, resulting in problems.
And you got to ask yourself, this is a very fundamental question. By my confronting my mother-in-law, how is this going to help? Is it going to breed positivity? Would it contribute to harmony? And the abiding question is this: do you want to be right or you want to be happy? We need to learn to forgive. We need to also understand that none of us is infallible. We're going to make mistakes and we'll continue to make mistakes.
Number 8, in-laws can't start to relax with each other until they achieve mutual acceptance.
Yes. Now that is so true. The whole idea is this, that if you look at the two sets of in-laws, it's very, very important that you are able to create a situation of harmony, bring them together. And regarding that, when sometimes unwittingly you show a kind of biasness to your parents at the expense of the parents of the girl, of the spouse, and vice versa, there can also be very, very a difficult situation. So we need to be as fair as possible. And of course, at the same token, we would expect our in-laws to also have an understanding, to give their children space so that they can develop into fully fledged adults, so that they can enjoy each other and fulfill their rights and their responsibilities.
Whether you're living with in-laws or not, make sure that you have open lines of communication. Also, explain your likes, dislikes, and personal boundaries, and give your in-laws an opportunity to do so as well. This can help in avoiding any misunderstandings. This was number 9.
Because one of the things that strikes me immediately is about the whole issue of discipline. Many a young couple, some of them are often afraid to leave their children with their grandparents, because grandparents, when they were young parents, they had a lot of fire, they were very robust, and they were strong disciplinarians. As they grew older, they tend to be a little mellow. And what they did not accept when you were a child, they tend to accept this with your own child. And that creates a problematic situation. I think it's important to have open communication, and where you discuss, for example, what you are trying and how you are trying to discipline your children. And so what we want from them is support and, of course, guidance.
Now we're moving on to tip number 10 on how to deal with in-laws. Be respectful to your in-laws by paying public and private tribute where appropriate, making sure you are sincere in giving that tribute.
Yes, once you pay tribute to anyone, it makes a huge difference. What it does, it inspires confidence, they have a wonderful feeling, and really they are drawn towards you, they are sympathetic towards you, and it must be genuine, it must be authentic.
Right, Idris, we've covered all 10 tips on what we can do in order to develop the relationship better, or perhaps even how to improve the relationship with the in-laws. Now, I want to move on to somebody who's perhaps newly married or perhaps getting married. What usually comes across before the marriage is, I love my husband to be or wife to be. I love my in-laws because I have no hassles with them. And the hassles usually start after the marriage. Sometimes, well, there is the conflict before as well. But let's just say that there aren't any because we don't know each other all that well. How can we avoid it? Minimize that conflict right from the start?
I think, I'm not too happy with the idea of in-laws, Whilst there is a kind of legal terminology involved, the bottom line, they are part of the family.
Because in-laws means they're only part of my family now legally.
Legally. They are part of the family. They're not outside the family. And we need to embrace them. Because remember, in the end, whatever emotional support you get from them, in the end, we are the beneficiaries. Because we are living at a time when many of the families have become very dysfunctional. And those that have the support of the grandparents, where there is harmony between the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law, you find that the children of that environment have a better chance to succeed. They have a better chance to be empowered with the right kind of attitudes. And the other aspect that we need to also understand, that one of the things that you got to always bear in mind, the husband and wife must strengthen their own relationship. Once they have a very strong bond, then inshallah that will help them to cope with other challenges from the in-laws. And sometimes people say, my mother-in-law just drives me crazy, But what are you dealing with essentially is the personality type that you're referring to, right? Often you see what you got to also understand, that in many ways the kind of roles we assumed when we were children often play into adulthood. What do I mean by that? That we need to understand that as you grow older, we need to adopt more adult-like attitudes. We need to refine our character and our etiquette. And once you do that, then you'll be able to recognize the otherness of your in-laws and give them the due respect they deserve.
I want to go back to this little term you used about my mother-in-law drives me crazy. Now, can it not be, upon reflection, more the fact that my mother-in-law has a wealth of experience and she's sharing with me advice on what I should be doing? But, it could come across in the wrong way for two reasons. One, I'm not open to suggestion. And two, the style in which it's being told to me.
Of course, but at the same token, whilst I acknowledge what you are saying, that sometimes some mother-in-laws can also be overbearing. And if we have a perspective transformation or look at it differently, she could even say, my daughter-in-law, of course, she comes from another home, and perhaps she has some unique ways of doing things, and I can learn from her. And you find when daughter-in-laws and mother-in-laws share recipes, when they work together, there is so much of joy. And no one sees that as an intrusion, because the bottom line in the end is also, it's about your own self-esteem. We spoke about that, about adjustment. And if you are by nature insecure, then you'll see every act of your mother-in-law in a very insidious way. You'd also give it a kind of intentionality and say, no, she's doing this because of this, she's doing this because of that. Yet intentions may be completely noble. And I think at the very beginning of the marriage, often when the daughter-in-law requires the most kind of support, the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law should have such a beautiful relationship where she's able to pick up the phone and say, Ma, I'm cooking this over here. What advice do you have for me? And instead of phoning her own mother, speak to her mother-in-law. The mother-in-law will be very excited about that because she's seeking advice from her.
How can a mother or a father help in building up the relationship between their daughter and the in-laws or son and the in-laws?
I think it starts off as children. It's by your own example. They would see how their own mother and father dealt with the in-laws. And when children grow up in a home where their own parents have a beautiful relationship with this mutual respect, and children would really mimic their parents' adult behavior. And also, what is needed anyway is maturity and understanding. And I'm so glad that we are referring to this because, there's so much of impatience now. Maybe our lives have become very stressful. We don't have the time and energy to even make a little phone call. We don't have the time and energy of even having a conversation with the other.
Now, I want to go back to one of the questions that I had asked in the analysis. And the question was as follows. In-laws should not be consulted when major decisions are made. Number 1 was strongly agree and number 5 was strongly disagree. What should the correct answer be? And what are some ideas of major decisions?
You see, for example, let us say you are thinking of relocation. You think you're moving from this town to another town.
Okay, which is the correct answer first?
It all depends. I would say that they should be consulted. They are your parents. They need to be consulted. Perhaps get both the in-laws there together. Have mashura, to have a discussion, consultation, and seek their advice, right? And yes, if there are any reasons in which they have some misgivings, you could reconsider it. But the same token, they need to also give the benefit of the doubt in terms of your own wisdom, what you discuss. Now, the question is this, if as a young boy you have inspired confidence in your parents, then there is a strong possibility they would support you in what you're doing, because in the end, after all, they both love you, and what their concern is about your happiness here or anywhere else.
Where does the father-in-law fit in the picture with his daughter-in-law or son-in-law?
The father-in-law is very critical. I think often father-in-laws appear to be less emotional about situations. They are less expressive about their concerns, whilst the mother-in-law or the mother are more effusive, they are more expressive. And where there is a need for sanity to prevail, often the man has to play a significant role. Otherwise, the man could also exacerbate the situation. I'm not suggesting that all men are rational enough in doing that. There may be a few who are not.